All right, good morning everyone. How are you doing? Good to see you all. So excited to dive into our time today. So I think you're really going to be in it for a treat. This whole session is based on a lot of research kind of in the field. I work with a lot of leaders across the country. I just flew in late last night. My flight was a bit delayed from the East Coast, working with leaders on this very topic. And so it's very top of mind. I'm really excited to continue to launch into this. And we're really going to focus today on this idea of cultivating clarity. And it's a guide for leaders to use for following up and following through, specifically when thinking about those that you're leading and how to make sure that the follow-up is really strong so that the follow-through really meets your vision for what excellence should look like. And so a little bit about me, I recently wrote a book called Delivering Dignity, which is really a leader's guide to how do we ensure that leaders really understand the people that they work with. They really understand their specific culture, all the different ways that they're showing up, and harnessing that reality that each of us brings to the table to really maximize impact in the organization. So really the basic idea is if we understand the people we lead, we build cultural competence, we're able to really get the best out of those that we're leading so that we can maximize overall impact for the organization. And so this was really kind of came from a lot of my doctoral dissertation work when I was working on effective leadership. And a lot of what influences my work as a leader, kind of guru and consultant, really stems from my life outside of my career and my career journey. So I thought it would be important to share a little bit of that with you as we jump into our time. So I'm a wife and a mom and a mentor, which takes so much negotiation and understanding how others tick and how to really take your understanding of different people and different circumstances to get the optimal results for whatever you're navigating. And in my career also, I spent many years as an educator in the urban core, working in couple of years actually, my first couple of years worked in the lowest performing school in the state of Missouri. This school was really, really struggling, and so had an opportunity to see what does it look like when teams are not performing optimally, and what makes the difference in teams that do excel high. So I had some opportunities to work in high performing schools as well. Went on to be a founding principal. I worked in, started 2 school concepts, moved to nonprofit leadership as an executive director of a nonprofit, and then decided to start my own strategic advising firm because I kept seeing the same issues and a myriad of sectors, and really the core issues we experience as leaders, it doesn't matter what kind of field we're in, they all exist in the same, show up in the same way, just packaged differently. And kind of in the center is a Christ follower. That really, biblical principles really outline a lot of what I'm going to be presenting today, because I think they're just really just kind of are critical for leadership. So I want us to really dig into this first term, which is dignity. And you'll see a lot of my reference points in my first book, Delivering Dignity, because it really serves as a launching off point for what we're discussing today. So I thought it was important to have the definition for dignity because we hear this word a lot. It's kind of a buzzword in some circles, but I don't know if we often take the time to consider what this word really means. And so it's the state of being worthy, honored, or esteemed. And when you think about that, how often are you intentionally cultivating a culture of dignity within your organization or within your work or in your life in general with those with whom you interact? We're going to center on this quite a bit because in order to cultivate clarity, which we're going to dive deeper into today, we have to understand dignity and how it is quite dignifying for folks to feel worthy, honored, and esteemed when we're clear with them and we cultivate clarity so they understand exactly what our expectations are. And so really when we talk about delivering dignity and make sure that folks that we're serving, and I think leadership is an act of service, I really believe that they're understood and affirmed so that their expertise and their perspective can be fully leveraged to drive radical results. So I want you to think about a time where you had to be in a situation where you had so many good ideas or a perspective point that was really critical to move the needle, but it wasn't considered. What was the impact of that? When you had a solution or you had an idea and others, maybe a leader you had, didn't take it into account or maybe didn't even ask you, what was the impact of that reality? Would love for you to talk to those at your table around that, and we're gonna bring it back because this is gonna be quite interactive today. So talk to those around you about that experience. Do you mind sharing that? I feel like that's such a common perspective. Okay,
I don't mind
perfect.
at all. Yeah, I actually interviewed you. I used to work at Junior Achievement.
Oh my gosh. Okay, very good.
We connected.
Oh my gosh, I remember
that.
Yes.
We were on a virtual,
I remember that.
call.
Yes. Because you were doing a story or something, I remember.
Yeah, I hope we finally posted.
Oh my gosh.
We were doing a lot of library.
Yeah, that's right.
Collecting stuff that were good to pepper out as we need.
I love it.
I'm not there anymore. So
you're not. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I work at Mid-Continent Public Library.
Oh, I love it. Okay. I love our libraries.
Oh my gosh,
they're
incredible.
Okay. I'm gonna bring it back to you.
I don't mind.
Perfect. Okay. We're gonna bring it back in about 10 seconds. All right. I'm hearing so many good conversations. I'm going to have Tori launch us with her perspective sharing first.
Okay, called out there. No, I had shared at my table that it started without that understanding. So in this experience, I was new, had never done this role before, and never was kind of given that fair shot because I'd never done it before. I never felt like I was really valued or understood or given ideas to cultivate because, you've never done it, you have to learn, or you've never done this or whatever. So that's kind of what I shared.
What was it? How did that make you feel when that happened?
Well, I left. So,
yeah. So that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me too, it just it wasn't helpful for me to think I could do that. I already had some imposter syndrome and some questions about can I do this role? Can I have this big next step? And it just affirmed what I couldn't do instead of built up what I could have possibly done.
I'm gonna ask you one more question.
Okay.
What do you think would be the impact?
Nobody talk loudly when she was I
know, that was so good. Can you share this? It's exactly what we're driving towards. Could you share, what do you think would have been the impact if you were dignified and that was that all that you had to share was cultivated?
Yeah, even if my ideas weren't used, I think just knowing that they deserve to be heard would have helped me continue to express them. I recovered from a lot of burnout, and over that time that's gone past since that experience, I've started to come back out. And so even in my current role, it's okay, what could I have done differently earlier on in my current role had that been cultivated from the beginning?
That's so good. Can we give it up for Tori? Thanks so much. Yeah, and I think she brought up such a good point. It really becomes a retention issue. So if people are not feeling a sense of dignity, they're not going to stay. And you're missing out on someone really flexing their muscles of creating ideas and creating different things that could be really so crucial to your organization. They don't feel safe. They don't feel cared for enough to even share that. So what are you losing as a leader because of that? So this really goes down to this dignity framework. And so this is something I talk about so much in my book because a lot of my research centers on this idea. I was really trying to distill down leaders who deliver this idea of dignity in their organizations. They do some really critical things, and they do it consistently. And they do these things that you see kind of the outside circle in those bubbles. They do them so frequently that it becomes just such a core part of how the organization operates culturally. And so with that, there is a lot of relationships at the core. That's what it really is these authentic relationships where you really care about the person. And it's not like checking off a box, but it's really trying to understand who the people are that you're working with. And again, this is in the context of like a leadership dynamic where you're managing someone, but this is applied to any facet of life. This really holds space there. And so when you are having those relationships, you can really understand what makes people have a sense of belonging. Because what makes me feel like I belong may be different from you. And you can only figure that out if you understand who the person is and you engage with them. And that's another key part for folks feeling the sense of dignity. Another piece of that we're gonna go around is vulnerability. And this is something, if you're engaging and building those authentic relationships, you have to be vulnerable. You have to share about your struggles and points of triumph and invite others to do the same. That's how you build a relationship. You get to know them and you can better empathize with them. Empathy meaning you really, if they're having a hard day or even something great that's happening, you can really express how you are responding to that in an authentic way. So if they're sad, you can ask them why. You can express how you felt sad in different ways. It brings those points of connectedness together where they are really going to feel like they are understood and seen and valued. And a part of this is diversity. So diversity of thought and perspective, background, all of those things are so important in order for folks to have a sense of dignity in organizations. Because oftentimes we think of diversity as like one-dimensional, like, oh, it's only about race. It's so much more. It's so many points of diversity make up each of us. And if we don't attend to the diverse facets that make up each of us as an individual, as we're leaning into relationships, we can miss core pieces of people that could make them not feel seen and thus not be dignified. And so that's a really important part I want to really stamp for us. Then this idea of equity. And so how are we understanding how the people that we're working with, we have these relationships, we get to know them. How do we make sure that we're giving them what they need to be successful? This is important because it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Oftentimes I work with leaders and they want to have these amazing plans for how they're going to develop their talent, but it's like this one-size-fits-all approach. And if you know your people, you know that won't work. It may work for some, but not for all. And in knowing your people, you can tailor things to what each person needs, because we all need different things, and we only know that through the relationships that are centered on dignity. And the way we kind of fit all this together and know how to navigate how we can best support others is by developing our own sense of cultural competence. How do we understand and know the different cultures and the cultural facets that make up each person, and how do we respond appropriately so that they are feeling that sense of being seen and that real deep sense of dignity as well. So with that, of course, I have some questions because I want us to reflect on this, because that's when like the stickiness in the brain happens, where we're really making meaning from what we're discussing, is when we're able to reflect and kind of speak out. You're going to talk to those in your group once more and think about, what does dignity look like? And I really want you to think of a specific example that you experienced or witnessed in which dignity was delivered for you. You were seen, you were dignified. And how did that make you feel as an individual or someone who was a part of a team, if your whole team had a clear sense of dignity? Go ahead and take about 2 minutes to discuss it.
And so when they said that, I was like, someone noticed. I also employers. Some of them and it was very unexpected that with one of our concerts, the board member, I got like actual legitimate applause. And it was amazing. Yeah, and it was, yeah, no, it surprised me. Yeah, it surprised me, but it felt so validated that I'm in the right place doing the right thing.
About 20 more seconds.
Well, so we own a business.
I wanted to see if there's anyone willing at this table to share out.
Also known as the Artwork.
Okay, awesome. Emily?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So I was at the Brand Lab.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's still open, isn't it?
No, it's not open. Yeah.
I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
Are you still in Kansas City?
Yeah. All right, we're gonna bring it back. Emily was voluntold by her table. I feel like these discussions are getting so good. People are like, I don't want to stop talking. All right, 5 more seconds. All right, Emily's going to share out.
My example was I was at an organization and there was a project that wasn't really going well, and sometimes I'd make suggestions on how to improve it, but they were kind of just like blown off. And I was meeting one-on-one with another staff member, and they were like, I didn't bring it up. They're like, it's frustrating, like you have like ideas put forward and they're kind of just blown off. And that like was really made me feel like seen, and especially from, it was like a coworker I really respected. And so even though it really didn't get much better, that honestly made me feel so much better that they just like acknowledged that they saw it. And so I think just acknowledging it was a big impact to get started.
How did that make you feel?
I'm really good because sometimes I'm like, am I crazy? Like, am I making this up in my head? And so, and I think that confirmed for me, like, oh, I'm not. And so that just, you question yourself if you feel like no one's agreeing. And so when a respected, like, colleague said that, and they didn't have a reason to, they weren't my manager. There was no reason for them to have to say that. And so I think that had a big impact.
That's great. Yeah. I love your example because maybe to the leader it was seemingly small to take the time to do that, but for you, like you said, it had a big impact. That's really powerful. All right. So we're going to move into our last kind of component of laying the foundation of our conversation around cultivating clarity with dignity. And this is called a dignity breach. And this is a kind of a term that I coined when you have a situation where your dignity is eroded or stripped away, and it could be intentional or accidental, but regardless of the intent, the impact is there, and it doesn't feel good. And so I'm going to share an example of a dignity breach that I experienced. And it's one of those dignity breaches where it really kind of set the stage for me, for my life, in terms of really wanting to make sure I was as intentional as possible of not perpetuating dignity breaches. And it started all the way in kindergarten, which is kind of wild because when we think about it, we all have those early formative memories of something that happened to us where we can kind of take that experience where we had a dignity breach, where our dignity was eroded in some way, and apply it to our life as adults, where when someone is not dignified, we can empathize because we've experienced it, and we remember those moments when our dignity was breached for us personally. So I'm going to share mine as kind of a model of some reflective work that we're going to do, which is going to really serve us well throughout our time this morning. So I remember my family and I were living in St. Louis, Missouri when I was growing up, and I was about 5 years old, and it was the summer before kindergarten. And my parents thought it would be such a good idea to prepare me for my new school because I was going to be going to a predominantly white school, and I had always been in like very diverse school settings, kind of in my early childhood years. And so I remember they thought it would be such a great idea to have us watch a PBS documentary on the Jim Crow South. I was 5, that was a lot. And I'm looking back now at Mom, like that was really intense. And that night I had nightmares, and like I had to sleep in my great grandma's bed because I was like waking up in like the sweat of like, oh my gosh, this is traumatizing. I couldn't imagine living that, right? And so I remember seeing the images of black bodies being hung on trees and dogs attacking people and all of these things. And my great grandma telling us about how one night when she was a little girl, the Ku Klux Klan came to her house and she had to hide under her bed. And I was like, this is it solidified, like this is real. This is not just a documentary. My great grandma lived through this. And my parents were really trying to help me to understand this idea of racism and how I may encounter it in life, because they suspected that I would likely encounter that reality in my new school just because of the demographics of the place where I would be learning. And so my first day of kindergarten, I remember I sat next to a student and our desks touched. They were kind of like side by side, and her pencil rolled into the middle of the desk where our desk touched. And I felt great urgency to help my classmate and give her her pencil. And she was getting her pencil at the same time, and our hands touched. And she had the look of disgust like I've never had seen up until that point in my life, and began like vigorously wiping her hand after touching my hand. And I thought, am I gross? Like, what is it with me where I am getting such a reaction? And you know what's funny, to this day, sometimes if someone brushes against me, I have this reaction like, oh my gosh, they probably think like something's wrong, because it just was that traumatizing of an early memory. And so later that day, we were at recess and we were playing, and I was really not very shy as a kindergartner, so I went up to different students and asked if they would play with me, and was told no over and over again. And I wasn't sure why that was, but really did not feel a strong sense of belonging at all. And then I retreated to the perimeter of the recess area and just watched the other students playing. And I thought to myself, man, I want to have fun too. I wish I could kind of engage with others. And just then I began to feel like this feeling I'd never felt before, this feeling of isolation, and tears began to well up in my eyes just because I was just yearning for some sense of belonging and to participate like the rest of my peers were able to do in that moment. And I remember this first grade boy came up to me, and I was so excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, I think he's gonna ask me to play. I'm so excited because I really don't wanna have to watch other students play. I wanna engage as well. And he came up to me and approached me and said, and I'll never forget it, "What are you looking at, blackface?" And I was like, oh my God. And then like the waterworks happened, because what had been building up in my eyes really receded in the moment when I thought he was going to invite me to play. It all came back up and I couldn't control it. And so that was my earliest dignity breach, where I'm like, it's so seared in my memory. And even though that was such a hard moment, I'm grateful that I remember it so clearly, because when moments where I'm able to see dignity breaches around me, or maybe I'm feeling inclined to perpetuate one, I remember that moment in others so that it stops me and I can empathize when I see it, and I can address it with great urgency, and I can be so even more attentive to ensure that I'm not perpetuating dignity breaches, whether big or small. And we're not perfect. We're gonna perpetuate them in some way, intentionally or unintentionally. But how much better if we have a lens around it and we're really intentional about it, because we're centering on empathy from our own experiences. And so I wanted to share that because I believe that dignity breaches are so important for us to reflect on and remember to guide our empathy when we're working with others. And that really moves on to this idea of clarity. And that is the quality of being coherent and intelligible. And these two elements, this idea of dignity and clarity, really go hand in hand. And we're going to unpack why. Firstly, I want to zoom in on one of those words from the definition of clarity, which is coherent. And it's logical and consistent. It is also united as a forming of a whole. That's what we need to be cultivating as leaders. If we have a strong foundation centered on dignity, it really allows us to propel towards greater coherence, which in fact is dignifying. When you have a culture that is united and whole, how good do you feel and how affirmed and dignified do you feel as someone who works within that type of a structure? So, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about action and how because we've talked a lot about laying the foundation, what a dignity breach is, clarity. Let's get into the action of like what clarity is so we can have a deeper understanding of how we can ensure that that is becoming a reality in our work. And so at the core, when we think about clarity, it really centers on accountability and support. If you care for someone and you have a relationship, you know how to hold them accountable to get the best results possible, but also how to support them with the exact support they need so that as you're having really high and clear expectations for them, they're supported to meet that mark. I cannot stress enough how critical this is because often when I'm working with leaders, they have really high bar of expectation for their leaders, but don't always have the support that is just what the person needs to actually meet that bar. They may tell them a directive, they don't always check in or even follow up with the proper development to get them to that final aim. And so these two pieces together are so crucial. So there's a little bit of a framework that we're going to operate with here to really understand this. When you think about support, it should be check-ins on progress. So you never want to give someone a deliverable or an objective, and you don't check in on how they're progressing. That's going to set them up for success, or for failure rather. And when you set someone up for failure because you have not done your due diligence as a leader, that is a dignity breach. And also you have to couple that with clear benchmarks from an accountability perspective. So you've already outlined what are the clear benchmarks along the way that one must meet to get to that point of where I need them to go, that final objective. How am I checking in at each of those points to make sure that they have what they need and that they're clear on where they need to go? Next is frequent checks for understanding. So sometimes we assume people understand what we're asking them to do. They may not always understand it and may say they do. And another thing that happens is they may understand it for the way that they're thinking, but it may actually not align to your vision of understanding. That's why it's so critical for you to be clear as a leader on what the objective is and for you to articulate it clearly. That is essential for cultivating clarity. Another key component is ongoing feedback. Affirming feedback and adjusting. I know we've all been in situations where we get a lot of adjusting feedback on ways we need to improve, but it's never affirming. That's actually not helping in terms from a dignity framework. We really want to make sure we're balancing it so that people don't feel deflated and like you're only focusing on the negative, but you're also acknowledging the progress points and the opportunities for them where you see growth and some positive things in what they're doing. Pairing that with accountability, you have to inspect what you expect. So if you expect a certain deliverable or a certain task to be done, inspect it. Don't just assume it's done. You're inspecting to make sure that like the compliance part has happened, that it's happened, like you can check off the box that it's occurred, but you're also inspecting it to make sure that the quality is what you need. So often I work with leaders and they're so frustrated about the people they work with because they have a deliverable and it's not meeting the mark, but they never checked it along the way. They just gave an expectation but didn't inspect it. And so the person was just like, okay, I never actually got feedback on how it was going. And I spent all this time, I spent months working on this project, and you don't like any of it? That all could have been avoided if we're really operating with dignity at the heart. And we're giving them that information, feedback, and guidance and clarity along the way. The next thing is modeling. I'm a former teacher here. It's in the education world, we call it an I do, we do, you do. And so if someone is coming to you and you're doing a check for understanding, like, hey, do you understand what this final deliverable should be? Or do you understand how to have this conversation with a client? And they're nodding yes, and you're saying, okay, well, tell me about how you're gonna approach that conversation with a client. And they're bungling it up or just really isn't meeting the mark. You may need a model for them how it should look. Because in the absence of seeing it effectively done, folks don't even know where to go to get to the point of effectiveness. And so as a leader, you have to be so clear on the vision of success that you can actually model it yourself. And this is when you really are saying, okay, I'm gonna show you what this looks like and I'm gonna actually have you practice it so that you're really confident in delivering whatever I've asked you to do at the level that I've set and set out for the expectation for delivery. And then with the modeling, you may need to shift the plan when needed as a part of that accountability piece. So sometimes you have a big vision of what you want a person to do, but they may not be ready yet. So you have to be prepared to meet them where they are, never lowering the bar, but maybe shifting the expectation in the moment, knowing that they're gonna get there eventually. And finally, collaborative conversations where you identify the gap. If someone is really struggling with the same thing over and over, engage in a conversation and kind of ask them what the issue is. Again, gonna go back to a kind of what I've been seeing a lot in the field. Leaders come to me so frustrated because they've asked the same person to do the same thing many times, and they've done the modeling, they've done the feedback, but it's still not meeting the mark yet. But they've never actually sat down and asked the person, what is the barrier to you being able to execute to this point? If you can engage in those authentic conversations, because back to the dignity model, you have really strong relationships built on rapport and respect, you can be candid with each other in a way where they already know you have your best interests in mind because you've established a culture of dignity. And it's not a gotcha, it's a how can I support you? And so really what's important is to guide up or guide out. You can have those really strategic conversations where how you're going to put a plan together to guide them up to where they need to be to fix those deficits, or even say, hey, maybe we're at the place where we gotta guide you out. Maybe this isn't a good fit for you, and that's okay, I'll help you find a good fit. But eventually, at times, sometimes those conversations happen. And I wanna be clear, with guide up or guide out, it could be for that particular project, maybe it's just not the season for that person, maybe they need to develop some other skills, or maybe even the organization, maybe they're like with their job, they're just really not meeting the mark, maybe it's time to guide them out. And so when you have those really strong relationships, those conversations are so much more meaningful and they're helpful for that person. It's not just like pointing fingers, it's I'm here to support you, I want you to thrive. All right, I've said a lot, and I would love to now get into a bit of a facilitator model and hear about your situations that you've had with an employee or someone that you collaborate with where it is a struggle for them to understand the level of clarity you're trying to bring forth with expectations, and would love to model that, like how this could be approached. So before we do that, would love for you all to talk with those around you at your table and think about a moment or an instance or even a current situation in which you've had a difficult time with someone you're leading to really execute at the level that you need them to. Talk to those around you, and if anyone would like to participate in the model where I would basically be modeling the incident, like these different components that we just talked about, to help provide a visual and a framework for how this looks like actually being put forth. So go ahead and talk to those around you first.
Well, and I was also thinking about my concerns. I really like to bring some of those
About 10 more seconds.
you'd show
All right, we're going to bring it back. I hate the stop the conversations are so good. All right. About 5 more seconds to wrap up. Last thoughts? Based on what was said, is there anyone who would like to kind of talk about their problem of practice and be vulnerable a bit and kind of go through how an approach to addressing it could look? Yes. Do you want to come up and do it? I can come to you too.
Are we going to role model?
We'd like role play it. Do you have one? Amazing, come on up.
According to Alistair, it's a good one.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Do you want to come up so we can role play it?
Sure.
Awesome. What's your name, sir?
Dave Black.
Dave, awesome. Thank you for being here. Awesome. Nice to meet you, Dave. Do you want to talk about your problem practice?
Actually, my friend knows about it because I asked her and others 2 days ago relevant. There was an ADHD session next door.
Oh, what?
And unfortunately, I said something wrong to somebody working for me.
Mm-hmm.
He asked a question and my response was, gave it to you in writing twice, spoke twice, you wrote it on your whiteboard, and I didn't answer his question.
So to help me understand, so basically they asked you a question and you said, well, I've wrote it, I've just told you, I wrote it on the whiteboard, I've written it down, I've done all these things. Was that your response?
Yes.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, do you want to go, let's role play from the moment where you, let's say, did you understand in the moment, like, oh man, that may not have been the right move, or was it kind of after that you were thinking on it?
At the moment, I was frustrated.
Got
I
it.
did a dignity breach.
Got it, got it, yeah. Got it, okay. I love the vulnerability and acknowledging. That's great. Okay, perfect. Let's do this. Would it be helpful to role play how you're gonna make it right?
Sure.
Would that be helpful?
I'm looking for your guidance.
Okay,
Yes, you tell
let's
me
do
where
it.
to go.
Okay, so I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna pretend to be you making it right, and you're gonna be that person, and I want you to like channel that person as much as possible. Like I want this to be as authentic as possible, like how this person would genuinely respond. All right? So take a moment to think about like how to.
Well, I'm thinking it's on camera, and that might not be different.
Okay, that may be good. That's a really good point. So maybe don't to a T do it, and maybe change key parts of the situation so it's not obvious.
Okay. All right, that might be a little bit hard.
Okay. So could we do it where, let's do something like that's a line but not completely matches that. How about a situation where we can just say, when I said the unkind thing out of frustration, can we keep it like that?
That I say.
Yeah,
I
like,
wish I'd have said that.
so yeah, so let's say, maybe when I react it in an unkind way, maybe we'll like leave it really kind of vague for the purpose of this role play. Does that work for you? Instead of getting into a lot of the specifics, just to maintain the dignity of the person involved.
Okay, so I ask you.
So I'll be you coming to the person that where the dignity breach occurred, speaking in very vague language, but still clear enough for us to understand how one might navigate such a situation. Does that work for you?
Okay. So
Okay.
I respond like.
Yeah, like you're that person without being too much like that person, so it's not obvious.
Just pretend like I'm not getting it. All right.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to say, because you have a St. Thomas hat on, and I love St. Thomas, I'm going to say like the person is Thomas for the purpose of this role play. Okay. Thomas, hi, do you have a second to check in? Is this a good time for you?
His response, yes.
Okay, great. Awesome, great. I really appreciate it. Hey, I wanted to talk about what happened the other day. I responded in a way that really wasn't unkind. I was frustrated. You were trying to get what you needed, and that was just just really not okay. And I just wanted to come to you and just say, I apologize. I really should have handled that differently. It's really been, something that I really care about is our relationship. I think that one thing that I really appreciate about you is that you're always trying to get what you need in order to be successful. All the information, you're always doing your best to make sure you're set up for success. And in that moment when I was unkind to you, I took that away and I invalidated it and I wasn't kind. So I just wanted to acknowledge it and just ask for your apology and let you know I'm gonna do better and I'm really gonna make sure that I don't do that again.
Can I record that and play it?
Yeah. So how do you think he would respond?
I think he would smile.
Okay, yeah.
I think he'd be overwhelmed
Yeah, why do you think he'd be overwhelmed?
because of my prior frustration too.
Yeah. This is good. What then, after you had that beautiful conversation, he's overwhelmed, what then becomes your responsibility as a leader moving forward?
To remind him that that's happening between us and say, how can we do it differently?
Yeah, so that could be a great next step. Hey, so this has happened many times before. I want to make sure that I'm supporting you as best as possible and not falling into the same trap of responding in a way that just isn't okay. So let's collaborate and talk together. How can we make sure that you're letting me know what you need and I'm really clear on that you're like, hey, I'm ringing the alarm and saying I'm not okay, I need to get more information. Can you let me know that early so that I can make sure that I'm already thinking through solutions to support you? So what do you think that could look like? Like when you start to feel like you don't understand something, how do you think you could come to me, or when do you think you can come to me so we can start to problem solve together?
I'll try that.
Okay, so what do you think he may say?
I think he'll tell me possible solutions, because
Okay.
it's already happened in the course of a year.
Okay, how many times about?
Oh,
Several, too many.
Many
Okay,
times.
okay. And so is this person, is it like a skill gap or a will gap?
something that happened 2 days ago, it was both.
Both, okay. So here's the deal. If it is a skill gap, say, do you know what the specific skill gap is, or are you like not even sure what the specific skill gap is?
And I would say that he responds with not wanting to look like he doesn't know or isn't going to get it right. So then there isn't an honesty loop.
Yeah, yeah. Does he feel comfortable coming to you for feedback or to ask questions?
Because of my prior frustration, I would say no.
Okay, maybe we can start there. I'm loving how reflective you are, because I think you're modeling like what excellent leaders have to be is like reflective, because that's how we figure out how to move forward. And so you could say, I acknowledge it. I know that you may not feel safe coming to me when you have questions because of the way that I've responded in the past. And I want to own and acknowledge that. That was not okay. I'm really working to be better because I care about you. And I realize that I am not living up to the leader that you deserve and need when I do that. So what I'm going to do is whenever you have questions, the best way for me is if you can, you have to think about what is real for you. I'm stepping out of the model. You have to think about what's best for you. Back in the model. For me, email is so helpful for me because if I get your email with your question, I can think on it and figure out how to respond, and I don't feel like the urgency to respond in the moment. Sometimes in the moment when I have to respond, I get overwhelmed with all the things, and I can't actually take the time to deliver the information in a way that I think will be helpful for you.
I like it. I'm going to try it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. All right. I think the more you can reflect on what you can anticipate, the better it is to cultivate clarity in those conversations. And that goes back to relationships. Good or bad, if you have relationships, you've interacted enough, you better know how to navigate because you can better anticipate how they're going to respond, what they're thinking, and what they're feeling. That best allows you to navigate those challenging situations. And I love the model, your leadership is so great because you're so vulnerable and reflective, and like, oh, I messed up. Like that was a dignity breach. I'm naming that. If we don't own it, we can't address it, and we can't move forward, and we can't get better. And so the fact that you did that is like incredible. So hats off to you, seriously. That's great. All right. So as we move it along, I want us to think about the Blanchard and Hersey situational model. I love this model so much, because there are going to be so many times in our leadership journey where people are going to be all across the board when we think about this model for leadership. So when we think about the different quadrants, there's high support and low directive behavior. There's high directive and high support behavior, high directive and low supportive behavior, and low supportive and low directive behavior. In short, there are some people who you don't need to give a lot of support to, you don't need to give a lot of direction. They can go and they can fly. But there are others who need a lot of support, a lot of direction, a lot of follow-up. You gotta know your people so you can tailor your approach to those you are serving through your leadership. And so this again goes back to that relationship piece. You're operating with empathy and care so you can best place them in what they need and respond accordingly. So within your team or organization, do you observe colleagues who are staying in one quadrant or advancing to progressing? So here's the deal. If you have someone who's like, you have to check in on them all the time, they need a lot of support, a lot of directive, and they need a lot of support. Is that someone that should be staying in that, or should they be progressing where they eventually need less and less support and less directive? What are thoughts? Should people stay in that, or should we be, as a leader, moving them along?
I think sometimes you have to move them out.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
Well, I think sometimes.
I'm going to give you the mic. Yeah.
Speaking both from a leadership, as a leader, and also as an independent contributor, there are times in an organization where you find yourself being in a situation or delegated, asked to do something, and you don't get the support that you need. Mm-hmm. So you feel like, oh my God, I gotta be able to do this, I'm gonna stay up all night, I gotta figure it out, but there's no help. And then it's a skill or will, like you talked about. Mm-hmm. So I may have the will to do it, but I don't have the skill to do it. So as a leader, I have to recognize that person doesn't have the skill set to be able to do it even though they want to do it.
That's right.
So maybe there's another place in the organization where they're going to fit better, where they're going to be more successful.
Yep.
So as a good leader, it's really up to me, what you've been talking about this whole time, is to really make that decision and coach that person and help them make that decision themselves.
That's right.
So they don't feel like they're being kicked out of the nest, but
Yes.
they're going to have some support and go somewhere where it's going to be a better fit in the organization.
I love it. Thank you so much. You bring up a great point around like transparency along the way. So when you're giving feedback along the way, you're trying to move them from like having all these touch points all the time to the point where they're becoming more independent and really trying to own more and do so effectively. If they're actually not showing sufficient movement, then you'll have that conversation. Is this the right place for you organizationally or positionally? Also, you should be having those like very transparent feedback conversations about where people are and where they need to go ongoing. So by the time you get to that point where you're like, this is not a good fit, it's not a shock. They know it's coming, and they also know you have your best interests at heart. So that part is so critical that you said, so I just wanted to like stamp that further. I'm so grateful you brought that up. All right, so here are some like key headlines I want us to stamp. When we talk about what must be true for everyone to thrive, we already talked about that dignity component, and we've been talking a lot about that clarity component. It is precise is nice and clear is kind. I love Brene Brown. She talks about that a lot. I'm like, oh, I have to like shout her out. So if you are precise and clear, that's going to be so helpful for people to actually know what it is you want them to do. Keep that in mind when you're talking to folks, when you're articulating a vision or an expectation, so that there's no confusion about what it is they should be doing or how they should be executing. And you continue to do that through your feedback, through those ongoing checkpoints. You keep this mantra in mind to help you. And to calibrate for clarity, to kind of like a check for yourself to make sure that you are really centering on this idea of clarity, is to know your vision. Do you even know what success looks like? Because sometimes I'm talking to leaders and they're, again, frustrated that someone isn't executing or delivering like they should. And I ask the leader, what is it they should be delivering on? And they actually can't articulate it. They actually don't know. It changes every time I ask them. You have to be clear as a leader, because then you're not setting them up for success to even be able to execute, because you don't even know what it is they're supposed to be executing yourself, right? The next thing is a timeline. When you are giving a deliverable or an objective for someone, have a clear timeline. Nothing frustrated me more than when I had a boss who would say, yeah, get it to me in a couple weeks. What does that mean? And then you're mad at me when it's not to you at a specific date when you never gave me a specific date. So you have to make sure you're very clear on when it needs to be completed, and you're checking in along the way before that point of completion hits. Milestones, those are those check-ins I just referenced. What are the key milestones to check the progress? Have you identified those as a leader? Make sure they're not arbitrary. Don't do it like as you go. Don't fly by the seat of your pants with this. Have them timed out so that you can actually be intentional with how you're going to support and provide feedback and guidance. What is the timeline for each milestone? So chunk it out for folks. So it's really, especially folks who are more novice, don't give them a big project and say, have it done by December 3rd. But you don't chunk it out for them so they know what the different key components are that you're checking in on that make up the entire project. And what does success look like for each milestone? If you're chunking it up bit by bit, what are the success markers for each of those components so that they're very clear along the way as they're completing something that's a bigger objective that you've assigned for them to do? Again, cannot stress this enough. I keep bringing it up. I'll keep bringing it up. This ongoing follow-up. What are the expectations for the follow-through for both parties? So not only do the folks you're giving an objective to need to follow through, you as a leader need to follow through. Keep into those check-ins, keep into that feedback, keep into that clarity. The onus is on both parties in order for something to be executed correctly.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
On this slide?
Yeah.
So from the lens of many of us in the room I know are like solo business owners.
Yeah.
And can you kind of pivot a little bit
Sure.
and talk about what this could look like just like for us? Because I
Definitely.
know that I let my own timelines go, I let
Yeah.
my own milestones go,
Yeah.
and I know that, again,
That's a great
kind of
question.
distracting us a little bit, but could you kind of talk about like what we could do in this space to keep ourselves accountable.
That's
for
so
this.
good. I'm so glad you brought up that question. So do you ever have contractors who you may subcontract out? Like this would definitely be something that you would make sure that definitely applies. Or even if there is a company that, I even think about like my tax person. I want them still to be accountable for stuff, right? Like that has to be right and exactly precise. So I'll still apply that model in that type of a situation. But to go back to another, I think part of the heart of your question is really centered around how do I hold myself accountable when there's so many different deadlines and I'm trying to answer all the emails and there's so much this workflow is out of control. I think it goes back to making sure that, and I talk about this a lot in my book, Delivering Dignity, you have to make sure that you're dignifying yourself and taking the time you need to get your stuff together. And I know that can be really hard, but you have to care about yourself enough and want to dignify yourself enough where you're not feeling stressed and overwhelmed so that you can better support others, especially if your team begins to grow, you're going to want that foundation really strong. Is that helpful?
Yes, for your
Okay, perfect. No, of course. And that's overly simplistic, so I'm happy to talk more afterwards if you want to go deeper. So feedback, it requires give and take. Don't just be open to giving feedback. Make sure you're really open to receiving feedback. You don't have to take all feedback, but really consider it, genuinely consider it. And then I have a frame for giving feedback, and we're running out of time, and I'm so sad because I love this frame. But this is really helpful for giving feedback. Always ask if it's a good time. It may not. I may just got some bad news on the phone. I'm not going to receive your feedback if you're coming to me at this moment. And then if they say it's not a good time, say, okay, I understand. When is a good time? Make sure you follow up to make sure it gets scheduled. I notice, be specific about what was observed. Do not add judgment. Just talk about plain facts. The impact, talk about the impact and name a specific actual impact or possible impact, and thank you for them. Give them the thank you for engaging in the opportunity to provide feedback. I am going to give us a quick call to action to wrap up our time. And this call to action really talks about the core commitments of clarity. As leaders in any field, and as leaders of ourselves, because more importantly, at the core, we're leaders of ourselves first. It is so important to make sure that we're centering on dignity for ourselves and for others. And with that, we're providing clarity for ourselves and for others. This will enable us to thrive and reach new heights, and those we serve through our leadership to thrive and reach new heights. That is my call to action for us all, and I'm so grateful for your time today. Thank you all.